Hello and welcome to the Fifth Down Huddle. Today is episode 10 of the off season. I'm super excited for this episode, but before we get started, I just wanted to let you guys know that the Instagram page is back up now and posting daily, multiple times a day, really with what is going on in the news, some open questions, some fantasy advice for you guys, all those types of things. At Fifth Down Huddle on Instagram. No spaces, no caps, no underscores, nothing. Just Fifth Down Huddle. And I'm going to ask you real quick to like and subscribe if you do enjoy what you're going to hear here. So let's get started. Let's huddle up. So the first thing I want to talk about today, something I've been very excited to talk about for a few episodes now. I've kind of been thinking about this and thinking if I was going to do a take on it. And I decided I wanted to talk about it. So I'm going to talk about the most underrated running back in the NFL, James White. He's played football for life. He started out at St. Thomas Aquinas High School in Fort Lauderdale, Florida. He played football with the Raiders and even went down as a member of the 2008 St. Thomas Aquinas National Championship team. Now, while at Aquinas, he split time with the running back position with Giovanni Bernard, who is the current day running back for the Cincinnati Bengals. White finished his tenure with St. Thomas Aquinas as the 70th ranked running back in his class, as well as being ranked as a 3-star recruit. Now, James White initially turned down offers from colleges like Clemson, Michigan State, and South Florida before he eventually ended up playing football at Wisconsin and was drafted by the Patriots in the 4th round of the 2014 draft. At Wisconsin, he averaged about 1,000 yards and 12 touchdowns each season, so pretty productive. And in total, he played for 4 years and hauled in 4,015 rushing yards and 45 rushing touchdowns. He also ended his college career with over 600 total receiving yards and 3 receiving touchdowns. Now, ironically, his NFL career has been defined up to this point not by his rushing ability, but by his receiving ability, something that was only severely showcased in his senior college season, in which he racked up over 300 receiving yards along with over 1,000 rushing yards. James White is currently the backup running back for the New England Patriots, but in his rookie year, he only played in 3 games. He totaled just 3 carries for 21 yards and 3 catches for 15 yards, something you can kind of expect from a 4th-round pick. A bad first season, as he was also inactive for the Patriots' Super Bowl win against the Seahawks that year, although he still had time. In his second NFL season, White began to turn his professional career in the right direction. In Week 13, White caught a career-high 10 passes for 115 yards and a touchdown in a 35-28 loss to the Philadelphia Eagles. He would finish off the season with a total of 40 receptions for 410 yards and 4 touchdowns, along with a meager 22 carries for 56 rushing yards and 2 rushing touchdowns. In White's third season, 2016, he broke out, and his name began to truly spread throughout the NFL. He finished the 2016 season with 60 catches for 551 receiving yards and 5 receiving touchdowns, to go along with 39 carries for 166 rushing yards. What would define the beginning of his NFL spotlight, though, would be Super Bowl 51 against the Atlanta Falcons. In this, James White ended up breaking several records and making a strong case for the Super Bowl MVP award. Now, the Super Bowl MVP award would ultimately end up in the hands of Brady, who would set the new record for passing yards in a Super Bowl, despite breaking that very record 2 years later against the Eagles with over 500 yards. White finished Super Bowl 51 with 20 total points off of 3 total touchdowns and a 2-point conversion. This was the first of many records that White would set that day. White also cashed in the final blow in overtime against the Falcons to put the Patriots up 34-28, ultimately completing their impossible 25-point second-half comeback. And during the game, White had 139 yards from scrimmage, 29 rushing and 110 receiving, becoming only the second running back in NFL history with over 100 yards in a Super Bowl. He also managed to break Demaryius Thomas's reception record from the Super Bowl prior with 14 total catches. After the game, several analysts and even Brady were confused as to why White did not receive the MVP award, but it was ultimately defined by who was seen as the Patriots' leader, Tom Brady. A year later, James White would put up similar regular season numbers with 171 rushing yards and 429 receiving yards. He would continue his postseason excellence, though, scoring both a rushing touchdown and a receiving touchdown in the Patriots' divisional matchup against the Titans, and in the Patriots' conference championship, White would end up with a touchdown as well. The Patriots would ultimately lose the Super Bowl to the Eagles, but White would also finish that game with over 70 scrimmage yards and a touchdown. In the 2018 season, James White was named a team captain for the first time in his career. This translated to career highs in rushing yards, touchdowns, receptions, and receiving yards. White totaled up 425 rushing yards, 5 rushing touchdowns, 87 catches, 751 receiving yards, and 7 receiving touchdowns. In total, he had over 1,100 scrimmage yards and 12 touchdowns. He would also tie another postseason record that season, tying the all-time single-game playoff receptions record with 15. White ultimately had another productive postseason, but was oddly and almost completely pushed out of the Patriots' offense in Super Bowl 53 with only 9 total yards. In 2019, the Patriots would ultimately suffer from a lackluster offense all year, but James White would still hold productive numbers, with 263 rushing yards and 645 touchdowns, totaling over 900 yards and 6 touchdowns. But this past season, along with Super Bowl 53, has brought an interesting and at times confusing narrative to go along with his career. Oddly, Sony Michel, the Patriots' current starting running back, has seemed to overshadow White's rushing ability in this past season, most surprising due to his 2018 career high in both rushing and receiving. In 2019, Michel averaged 3.7 yards per carry. James White averaged 3.9. James White led the Patriots in rushing attempts one time last season, in which he had 14 carries for 79 yards, along with 8 catches for 98 yards and 2 touchdowns in a 28-22 loss to the Texans. In this game, James White averaged 5.64 yards a carry. Sony Michel only broke 5 yards per attempt once that season against the Washington Redskins with 5.69 yards per attempt. In fact, James White also beat out Sony Michel's season total in yards per attempt by nearly half a yard. James White had 3.93 yards per attempt, while Sony Michel only had 3.69. So the confusing part comes when time and time again the Patriots chose Sony Michel over James White to lead the run game, when it was clear that James White could quite possibly put up much better numbers than Sony Michel had. Not only this, but by only primarily using Sony Michel in run sets and James White in passing sets, opposing defenses could often choose their defensive set based on which Patriot running back was on the field. Passing set for James White and a rushing set for Michel. And overall, despite the Patriots seeing James White's dominant 2018 season, they didn't improve their utilization of him at all. In 2019, White was targeted 28 times less, to 95 targets from 123 the year before. Interestingly, though, even with this, James White actually improved in terms of how many targets he caught, as well as improving his yard per catch average from 8.6 to 9.0. And despite catching 18% less passes than the year before, he only decreased 14% in yards. And honestly, I think 2019 was a case of Josh McDaniels and Bill Belichick wanting too badly for Sony Michel to be successful. Instead of going with what worked, the Patriots constantly and brainlessly threw Sony Michel up the middle for less than 3 yards over and over and over again. It was confusing to watch, as when the Patriots went James White's direction, they often got first downs and successful plays. But even then, they rarely increased how often they used James White. Now, some people may cut to the argument of, maybe James White is so successful because he's never been the Patriots' first option. Maybe that's why his averages in terms of per reception and per rush are so good. But that's the thing. What if the Patriots used him like the Panthers used Christian McCaffrey? If the Patriots ran first with White and passed first with him, wouldn't that be even more confusing for defenses? It would eliminate the identification of Sony Michel rarely catching passes and White rarely running the ball out of a pistol formation in the rare occasion that he is even put into a formation with the quarterback under center. As James White, if he both ran and passed the ball first, the defense wouldn't know what was coming even if James White was on the field, when now they can basically assume that when James White is on the field, it's a passing play. On top of this, James White's clock is ticking. At the very least, they could change up the playbook to give James White more of a rushing spotlight, at least to give him another chance to show himself off. And at the ripe age of 27, James White does not have a lot of time to be used the way he should be. Although, White has shown a bit of durability, so I'm not too afraid of that. He's only missed games due to injury once, in which he was injured in mid-December of the 2017 season, eventually returning for the postseason. So overall, all in all, James White is in my eyes the most underrated running back in the National Football League. The Patriots don't have a lot of time left with him either, and should give him a chance to be used more like the Panthers used Christian McCaffrey. Bring him back to the 2018 season when he had over 1,100 yards and 12 touchdowns. Allow White to run almost as much as he pass catches. Now next up for today, we're going to shift gears to another NFL player that I honestly am interested to talk about, and that I was very interested to look at his stats, look at his film, see what really is wrong with this player. And that player's name is Nelson Agholor, arguably the most inconsistent receiver in the NFL, neck and neck in that competition with Philip Dorsett. Now, looking at Agholor's career, he started out how you would expect a longtime NFL starter to start. He ended his rookie season with 283 receiving yards and a single touchdown over the course of 13 games. Not too bad for a first-year receiver, but he was a first-round pick, and we have seen a lot better from first-round picks. In his second season, Agholor didn't pan out much more, with only 365 yards and 2 touchdowns over the course of 15 games. And again, seeing as Agholor was a first-round draft choice, it was beginning to look like he might be a draft bust. In 2017, though, Agholor began to turn his career around. He would finish the 2017 season with more receiving yards and touchdowns than his previous 2 seasons combined, ending with 768 receiving yards and 8 touchdowns. Now, a lot of this success likely stems from the fact that Agholor decided to switch to a more slot-based role with the Eagles that season. He would also cap off his career-best season with an 84-yard performance in Super Bowl 52, adding a Super Bowl ring to his trophy case. In 2018, though, Agholor slightly drifted backwards in his development, despite starting all 16 games compared to his meager 10 starts in 2017. Agholor overall had lower rates of production. You can compare his 12.4 yard per catch average in 2017 to his 11.5 yard average in 2018. Along with this, he caught more passes, yet got less yards, as well as only half the amount of touchdowns that he had in 2017, with only 4. In 2019, well, I think we all know the story in 2019. The player who's become infamous for not being able to catch a ball when he's open. One may look to the fact that Agholor missed 5 games in 2019, but that ultimately doesn't explain a nearly 50% decrease in production in nearly every wide receiver category there is. Not to mention the drop passes. He went from over 700 yards to just over 300. He went from 11.5 yards per reception to under 9.5. His catch percentage also dropped an entire 10%, something that can't be explained with missed games. As seen not only in his yearly production, but his game-by-game stats as well, Agholor is an amazingly inconsistent wide receiver. It baffles me. And this was shown in his 2019 season quite a bit. Let's look at the games he did play, or the long stretch without an ongoing injury, which were weeks 1 through 9. In week 1, 2 catches, 11 yards. Week 2, 8 catches, 107 yards. Week 3, 8 catches, 50 yards. And not to mention that would be the last time that season he hit 50 yards. Week 4, no catches, no yards. Week 5, 1 catch, 20 yards. Week 6, 4 catches, 42 yards. Week 7, 2 catches, 24. Week 8, 4 catches for 7, and Week 9, 3 catches for 21. Now, the reason I didn't include the other 2 games he played that season was because it was after injury, so there's a bit of an excuse there of the injury might have been affecting him still in those games. But even then, Agholor's numbers are all over the place, stretching from over 100 yards in one game to 0 in another. And another thing I want to make sure I look into are who Agholor's quarterbacks have been. In his 2015 season, Agholor started his career with Sam Bradford running the show. As seen earlier, Agholor didn't have an amazing first season with only 283 total yards, but I don't think Bradford's to blame, as he had a relatively productive season with nearly 4,000 pass yards and 19 touchdowns, along with 14 interceptions and a solid 65% completion percentage, so he didn't play terrible. But the following year, Philadelphia looked for a new quarterback, and chose to start second overall pick Carson Wentz in week 1. Wentz would finish the season similarly to Bradford from the year prior, with just over 3,700 yards, 16 touchdowns, and a 62.4% completion percentage. The next 2 years became rocky for the Eagles' quarterback position, with back-to-back season-ending injuries on the half of Wentz. In both seasons, though, Wentz stayed productive in the games he did play. And an interesting stat is that Agholor actually ended up playing better under Nick Foles than he ever had in his career, with a 54.1 yard per game average when Nick Foles was quarterback, almost 10 yards higher than his average with Wentz under center in those 2 seasons. Although Agholor's numbers are so all over the place, even with Nick Foles under center, that it becomes nearly impossible to make a strong connection there and to blame it on the quarterback position. Now, another piece of the inability to stay consistent is the inability to consistently prove himself under pressure. Here's a few examples, and I'm warning you, it's going to annoy you. It's going to make you cringe. The first example comes with the Eagles down 7-16 against the Seahawks late in the second quarter. The stakes aren't very high. They're only down really a possession and a half. So it seems like your average drop for an NFL receiver. One that you drop, the stakes aren't too high. It's early in the game. Okay, whatever, next play. It's not a third down, whatever. But the next few examples come with the Eagles down late in games. In the first example, the Eagles are down 20-24 with just 1:57 to go. It's a 2nd and 2, and a big play downfield could make or break the game. Wentz lets loose a dime down the left sideline, and the ball falls right through the hands of Agholor. Not to mention, Agholor was untouched on that part of the play, and he could have ran all the way to the end zone without being touched. He had a few yards on the defender. And the Eagles went on to lose that game 20-24. They would not score another point. In the next example, the Eagles are down 10-17 against the New England Patriots. They're sitting at the Patriots' 26-yard line with just a minute left in the game. It's 4th and 10, and the Eagles need a 10-yard play to keep the drive alive. The Patriots bring all-out pressure, which forces Wentz to shoot a fly ball to the back of the end zone, which ended up being a near-perfect pass. But the ball gets held in Agholor's hands for a split second before he drops it upon hitting the ground. Now, granted, it was a difficult catch, but the part where he has the ball in his hands really just got me. Now, if he had not had the ball in his hands at all that play, it would have been a little more like, okay, whatever. It was a hard ball to track. But the fact that he had it in his hands just annoyed me. So the next example comes earlier in the same game with the Eagles down 10-17. It's a crucial 3rd and short with just 12 minutes left, and Agholor drops a perfect pass to his numbers. Again, they're down. There's 12 minutes left. It's a 3rd and short. If they keep this drive alive, they could score a touchdown, start making it a better game. But Agholor doesn't come up with the catch. So the next play comes at a 3rd and 4. Inside the red zone, tied up 20-20 against the Buffalo Bills. There's just 3 minutes left on the clock, and a touchdown could give the Eagles a win this late in the game. The Eagles make a great play call with something of a fake screen pass where Agholor is sitting. He gets a block from the inside receiver. Agholor's on the far right, almost touching the sideline. And at the last second, Wentz calls him just a few yards left in motion. The receiver goes up to block as if it's going to be a screen, but Agholor bursts out across the middle in a slant route, is wide open, has the first down easily, and drops the pass right on his numbers. A play that would have kept the drive alive and could have given him a touchdown. Now I'll stop there. There's more examples, but I'll stop there. So as seen time and time again, Agholor cannot seem to produce consistently under pressure. Don't get me wrong, he has made some clutch catches late in ball games, but it's the inconsistency that would worry me as a head coach. The inconsistency is just unavoidable. You look at receivers like Danny Amendola with the Patriots. He doesn't have a ton of skill. He never put up big-time Pro Bowl numbers, but in the big games, in the big moments, he didn't drop passes. He didn't make big mistakes that would make you think, what the heck are you doing, man? This is the biggest moment. You got to catch that pass. Well, the thing was, Amendola did his job when he needed to. He always did his job. He never did much extra, but he did his job, so you could rely on him. So the question I'm kind of answering here is whether Agholor is going to help or hurt the Las Vegas Raiders. In terms of overall production, I'm guessing he'll be a decent number 3 or 4 option, maybe even a number 2. But when it comes to counting on a player to consistently put up the same amount of numbers, to lead your receiving core, or to make a crucial catch at any point in the game, your odds of a drop or a mess up or a bad game on Agholor's part are not ideal. So overall, after looking at his stats and watching many compilations of his lowlights, his highlights, and his just normal game film, I'd have to say that Agholor is simply too inconsistent. If you're a team that has a dirt patch of a receiving core, a 5-year vet in the NFL could help you out. But if you have a decent enough receiving core, don't waste your time or your money on someone you won't be able to count on when it counts. So for the Las Vegas Raiders, I think this move is going to hurt them more than it will ever help them. Okay, so the last thing I want to talk about today is Drew Brees and Jake Fromm. Something, if you've been keeping up with NFL news, you know exactly what I'm going to talk about here. Their racist comments and text. For Jake Fromm, it's the text. For Drew Brees, it's the quote-unquote racist or insensitive comments about protesting the flag. For the second week in a row, I'm finding myself speaking on racial problems in our country. And considering this is an NFL podcast, it's definitely been interesting. Drew Brees has made a comment saying, "I will never agree with anybody disrespecting the flag of the United States of America or our country," on the topic of players possibly kneeling again in the 2020 football season. So he's basically saying, like, look, I'm all for what you guys are fighting for, but if someone were to ask me, do you want to kneel with us? Drew Brees is basically saying, I would never say yes to that just because of what my values are and what I believe it is doing to the flag. He believes it's disrespectful to the flag. Other people believe it's not disrespectful to the flag. Other people believe it's not all about the flag at all. And it's pretty much what you believe, and, well, Drew Brees believes that. So a lot of people around the league look this to be racist or ignorant. And across the league, different players made comments about what Brees said, such as Richard Sherman, who posted a lengthy tweet talking about it, saying, quote, "He's beyond lost. Guarantee you there were black men fighting alongside your grandfather, but this doesn't seem to be about that. That uncomfortable conversation you are trying to avoid by injecting military into a conversation about brutality and equality is part of the problem." A few other players responded, including some of his teammates. Michael Thomas said, "He don't know no better." Pretty straight to the point. LeBron James joined into the Twitter frenzy, tweeting, quote, "Wow, man," in all caps. "It is still surprising at this point. Sure isn't. You literally still don't understand why Cap was kneeling on one knee. Has absolutely nothing to do with the disrespect of the American flag and our soldiers who keep our land free. My father-in-law was one of those." Alvin Kamara tweeted a simple "oop" in response to Brees' comments, and Brees was silent for the remainder of the day, but Thursday morning he posted a lengthy apology to his official Instagram page, along with a video describing how he was sorry for the way his comments were interpreted. Drew Brees stated, quote, on his Instagram, "I would like to apologize to my friends, teammates, the city of New Orleans, the black community, NFL community, and anyone I hurt with my comments yesterday. In speaking with some of you, it breaks my heart to know the pain I have caused. In an attempt to talk about respect, unity, and solidarity centered around the American flag and the national anthem, I made comments that were insensitive and completely missed the mark on the issues we are facing right now as a country. They lacked awareness and any type of compassion or empathy. Instead, those words have become divisive and hurtful and have misled people into believing that somehow I am an enemy. This could not be further from the truth, and is not an accurate reflection of my heart or my character. This is where I stand. I stand with the black community in the fight against systemic racial injustice and police brutality and support the creation of real policy change that will make a difference. I condemn the years of oppression that have taken place throughout our black communities and still exist today. I acknowledge that we as Americans, including myself, have not done enough to fight for that equality or to truly understand the struggles and plight of the black community. I recognize that I am part of the solution and can be a leader for the black community in this movement. I will never know what it's like to be a black man or raise black children in America, but I will work every day to put myself in those shoes and fight for what is right. I have always been an ally, never an enemy. I am sick about the way my comments were perceived yesterday, but I take full responsibility and accountability. I recognize that I should do less talking and more listening. And when the black community is talking about their pain, we all need to listen. For that, I am very sorry, and I ask for your forgiveness. The interesting thing is that football fans did not seem too outraged at the comments Brees made in the first place. Several fans commented below reports of the initial comments on Instagram, including Brees' official Instagram page, such as ESPN, or not ESPN, but ESPN's Instagram page, saying that Brees is entitled to have an opinion, and that he should not be ashamed for it. They also commented arguing that what Brees said was not disrespecting anyone, it just got interpreted wrong. Now, in my opinion, Brees was in the wrong here. He said something stupid. It's what he believed, but he worded it stupidly. But not for, like I said, not for the reason you'd expect. I definitely believe he should have chosen his words more wisely. But I wouldn't shame him for the opinion he was trying to share. Saying I will never agree is definitely the section that sparked the most controversy, but it implies that Breeze does not support the Black Lives Matter movement that sparked kneeling in the first place, and that's where his comments went wrong. Although what Breeze was truly implying, as explained in his apology, was that he does support those movements, but would never join in on kneeling during the national anthem. In his mind, he believes that it is morally wrong to kneel during the national anthem, but that didn't also mean that he believed the entire movement was wrong, just that one form of protest. Now, I don't see much wrong with that. If he doesn't want to protest like that because he feels it disrespects our soldiers or his ancestors, then he shouldn't be ashamed for it. He never asked other players to stop or to not kneel. He simply said or implied that he would never, ever join into that form of protest. If he had tied in the kneeling with the entirety of the movement, saying something like, I don't support Black Lives Matter because they support kneeling, that would be something to react to. But his initial comment, I believe, was definitely blown out of proportion and was simply the result of poor wording on Drew Brees' behalf. Now, another thing that came out recently were old texts on behalf of Jake Fromm, a rookie drafted by the Buffalo Bills this past season. I actually think that quarterback position is pretty interesting. I'll take a second here to talk about it, just a quick summary of what I think about that. It's interesting that the Bills drafted a quarterback this year like Jake Fromm, because they already have Josh Allen there doing all right. You know, he's developing well. I'm wondering if they see Jake Fromm as a long-time backup, or if they're trying to say, you know what, Josh Allen, it's been 2 years. We're going into your third season. You got to start to take that next step to prove that you're the franchise guy that we can count on in the playoffs and to get us to the Super Bowl. Maybe that's it. Maybe it's to put some competition in the room. Maybe just get another smart quarterback to help develop Josh Allen. Who knows? But I just think it's an interesting move by the Buffalo Bills. So back to the old text on behalf of Jake Fromm, the racist text. Do I think it's something to cut a player over? No. But I believe it was definitely worse than what Breeze said. Ultimately, it was obvious sarcasm when reading the text, but even then, it shouldn't be said even in private, even in a joking matter. It's just stupid to say it in the first place, especially somewhere where it can be recorded, but just to think that that's okay to joke about is out there. It's definitely not okay. Because the same way that you wouldn't want someone talking crap about you in private, there are people out there who take offense to the knowledge that Jake Fromm would say things like that in private and think it's okay to joke about. But again, I don't believe it's something to be cut over. He apologized, and I'm certain he won't talk about it again, knowing the possible repercussions. Now, looking back to Drew Brees, I just want to add one more thing onto that. It's kind of been growing in my mind as I talk about Jake Fromm here. Drew Brees, do I think he should have been forced into making that apology? Yes and no. I think the apology was great. You know, he didn't just give in and say, my opinion doesn't matter. He basically said, look, I'm sorry that it was perceived the wrong way. I should listen more. I shouldn't just go out there and say whatever's on my mind. I should think about it and think about how people are going to be affected by what I say. I appreciated that. I respected that. But what I didn't really appreciate or respect is kind of the entire league just trashing him before he could clarify what he said. Now, granted, they've kind of gone back and said, okay, he apologized, we're all good now, and it's kind of not in the news anymore. So, obviously, they weren't going to hold a grudge there. But the fact that pretty much the entire league just turned their back on him right away was definitely not a good thing in my eyes. But in the end, what can you really expect? Comments are taken out of proportion all the time, and it was Brees' fault. He said it in a way that sounded racist. He said it in a way that sounded disrespectful, and that's his fault. That is Brees' fault, and we have to blame him for that, and he has to take responsibility for that like he did, and I respect him for that. So here, guys, I just wanted to say thank you so much for tuning into the podcast. Wherever you came from, BuzzSprout, Spotify, YouTube, wherever you came from, whoever showed it to you, or however you found it, thank you so much for tuning in. I really appreciate it, and I would definitely appreciate it if you dropped a sub if you enjoyed this. If you came back next week, if you're on Spotify and you enjoyed this, If you're on Spotify, check out the YouTube channel. I post each section of each podcast as its own separate video, just so that you guys can watch what you really want to watch without having to skip through an entire podcast. But yeah, thank you so much for tuning in, and thank you for huddling up with me. Remember to check out the Instagram page at Fifth Down Huddle on Instagram. No caps, no spaces. And yeah, thank you for coming, and I'll see you next Wednesday.